know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
That's comic Tony Hinchcliffe referring to Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage before a packed Donald Trump rally in New York earlier this week. Puerto Rico, by the way, is home to millions of US citizens who have millions more family members in the US. So that joke has resulted in expressions of fury that could affect the presidential election. Here to help us understand the situation from the US Studies Centre and the School of Social and Political Sciences at the University of Sydney, Associate Professor David Smith. David, welcome back to the show.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me back.
Okay, so this isn't the first time something ignorant, racist, threatening, or all of the above has been said at a Trump rally. So what makes this Puerto Rico remark a little bit different?
So this was really targeting a very specific group. Puerto Ricans in the United States tend to be very defensive about Puerto Rico, which is where their families come from. And because this wasn't made by Trump himself, I think that Trump's campaign has felt that it should distance itself from these comments. This is the first time that I've seen this year the Trump campaign actually trying to distance themselves from something offensive. In substance, I think it's not very different from things that Trump himself has said. For example, suggesting that Haitian immigrants are eating people's pets in Ohio. But Puerto Ricans could be a very important group in this election. It's been estimated that something like 6% of registered voters in Pennsylvania are of Puerto Rican background. So they could be a critical group in the election. And for someone associated with Trump to target them that directly, this is what's triggered a bit of a panicked response from the Trump campaign.
Yeah, well, tell us about why Pennsylvania is so important as a swing state.
Pennsylvania is very important because it is the biggest of the swing states. It has the most electoral votes that comes with it. It's quite hard to see either Harris or Trump winning the election while losing Pennsylvania. There are ways that it could happen, but both campaigns see it as the state that is the clearest path to victory. Now, margins there have been very, very close over the last few elections, less than a percentage point. And the polls currently out of Pennsylvania are suggesting exactly the same thing, that there is not just less than a percentage point in it, less than half a percentage point in it, if you look at the poll averages. This is why the candidates are essentially camped out there almost permanently because it's so important. So to have remarks targeting a group that makes up 6% of the electorate in a place which no candidate usually wins by more than 1%, you can see why this is making Trump nervous. Another reason why it's making him nervous is because he really wants to make gains among Latinos in general as a group. They feel that if they can make more gains with Latinos, then they will win the election, because this is a group that traditionally leans pretty Democratic. To have too many of those voters defecting to the Republican Party would essentially doom Kamala Harris. And so once again, to have these remarks out there a week before the election, when there would be voters who are just now really beginning to make up their minds about, do they vote for Trump, do they vote for Harris, or do they just stay home? They wouldn't see this as being very helpful to the cause.
And beyond, I guess, this latest controversy, there's been a lot of talk about the gender divide that might exist within the US electorate, and how Trump has been chasing the so-called bro vote. What do you make of that?
Yeah, this is another very important dynamic to the campaign. He seems to have almost stopped going after women voters. It just seems to be far more and more oriented towards men. This is reflected in the people he chooses to be interviewed by, people like Joe Rogan. It's really reflected in the lineup of speakers at Madison Square Garden that included everyone from Elon Musk to Tucker Carlson to Hulk Hogan, but not very much there to appeal to female audiences. He really feels that he can build a cross-racial coalition of men. And so they've got high hopes of getting maybe close to a majority of Latino men, getting maybe a quarter of male black voters. And they really feel that they can mobilize these male voters against the possibility of a female president. This was one of the factors that potentially brought Hillary Clinton undone in 2016. They're hoping that the same thing could happen with Kamala Harris. And certainly Democrats are worried about the potential of the gender gap. We had Barack Obama a couple of weeks ago saying that black men weren't being as supportive of Harris as they had been of him, and suggesting it's because they weren't really feeling great about the prospect of a female president. But this could, of course, cut both ways. Harris's advantage with women appears to be at least as big as Trump's advantage with men. It's an advantage grounded not just in Trump's personality, but also in the issue of abortion, which is shaping up to be potentially a huge one in the election. And there has been a pattern in the last few US presidential elections where more women than men have voted. So, going after male votes seems to be what Trump sees as his path to victory. On the other hand, it could be something that cuts off his ultimate chances of victory if more women than men actually turn out.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it as well. In a system where you don't have compulsory voting, people who actually turn up and cast a ballot are the ones that you need to make sure you're reaching. Now, listening to everything that you're saying, David, like you spent your career looking at this stuff, but as someone who just kind of dips in every time there's a US election, there'll be a lot of people listening today thinking, we're talking about the world's most powerful democracy, and we're talking about gender divides, people not wanting a female president. It sounds bonkers.
Yeah, this year's election has been particularly strange. We've had 2 assassination attempts of a candidate. We have a candidate who has had multiple criminal convictions and is facing other criminal charges. We've had a sitting president bowing out at basically the last minute and being replaced by a new candidate. And then in the final months of the campaign, we've really had Donald Trump leaning harder into racism and sexism than he has at any other point in his career. Listening to him now, listening to his rallies now, it's striking how much worse he is in these respects than he was back in 2016. He really seems to believe that he's invincible at this point, that he can say almost whatever he likes about whatever group, and it's not going to hurt him. It's just going to make his supporters like him more. And because of the state of the economy and the state of Joe Biden's approval ratings and people's concerns about having a female president, that he'll be able to get away with it all. It's really quite a concerning place for the world's most powerful country to be in, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And listening to some of the hate speech coming out of those rallies, it makes you realise that the rally where he just bopped along to music for 30 minutes was actually probably one of the best ones. Yeah, it certainly is quite bizarre. It's the strangest reality TV show that's going around at the moment, and we're lucky we've got you there to help us understand it. And keep that phone handy, David. We'll be speaking to you again as we get up to the election next week. Associate Professor David Smith, thanks as always for joining me on the Nightly Five.
My pleasure.